You're standing in an old barn, dust in the light, and there on a nail hangs a strip of rawhide, a tin cup, and a little pouch nobody has touched in 70 years. You think it's junk. It isn't. That junk kept men alive across 2,000 miles of open country with no doctor, no store, and no help coming. Here's what I finally figured out after wasting half my life buying gadgets. Almost everything a cowboy needed to survive a hard winter, a snake bite, or a week lost in the high country fit in a saddlebag and cost him next to nothing. We traded all of it for plastic and monthly payments, and we got weaker for it. I'm going to hand you 25 of those forgotten tools before we're done, and the last one comes straight out of a trail cook's notebook from the Chisholm Trail in 1868. I remember standing in my late uncle's shed near Amarillo, holding a cracked hoof pick, thinking it was worthless. I was wrong about that, and I was wrong about most of this. None of it needs a ranch. You can use it in a city apartment this weekend. Let me start with the thing I laughed at first. A simple strip of rawhide. Not leather, not rope, rawhide. I used to think rope was rope. Buy the strongest one at the store and move on. But the old hands didn't trust store rope for the jobs that mattered, and I couldn't understand why until I watched what rawhide does when it dries. Rawhide is cowhide that's never been tanned. You cut it wet, you wrap it around whatever you need to hold, and as it dries, it shrinks and locks down tighter than any bolt you can buy. Cowboys called a green strip of it a wang, and they mended saddle trees, axe handles, wagon wheels, and broken tool shafts with it. A rancher in the 1870s couldn't run to town for a new handle. He wrapped wet rawhide, let the sun do the work, and that repair outlasted the tool. Here's the part that got me. Wet rawhide shrinks with enough force to crack a poorly made handle, and when it sets, it's nearly as hard as bone. Museums out west still have rawhide-bound saddle trees from the 1860s holding together while the modern glued ones fell apart. I tried it on a busted hammer handle in my own garage. Wrapped it wet, left it 3 days. That hammer's still swinging today, and I haven't spent a dime replacing it. But rawhide only holds things together. It won't help you when you're miles from anywhere and the cold comes down, and that's where the next forgotten tool did something I flat out didn't believe. I always thought a cowboy stayed warm because of his coat. Turns out the coat was the least of it. The real secret was a scrap of oilcloth and a wool blanket folded a particular way, and there's a name for it that most people have never heard. The soogan. A soogan was a heavy quilt or wool blanket, and it was rolled inside a long sheet of waterproofed canvas called a tarp, though they meant something different by that word than we do. Together they made the bedroll, and that bedroll was a man's whole bedroom on a drive that lasted 3 or 4 months. The canvas was treated with linseed oil so rain rolled right off it. The wool inside kept its warmth even when it got damp, which cotton never does. Now here's the number that changed my mind. Wool keeps around 80% of its insulating power when it's wet. Soaked cotton keeps almost none, and it'll pull the heat right out of you and kill you. The old drovers knew this with their bodies long before any university put a figure on it. Texas A&M range studies later confirmed exactly what those men learned the hard way on the trail. So I stopped trusting my fancy synthetic bag for cold nights and went back to wool and a strip of oiled canvas. Cost me almost nothing at a surplus store. Warmest I've slept in years. Warmth keeps you alive at night. Therefore, the next problem is the one that killed more cowboys than cold ever did, and it's the one nobody wants to talk about: bad water. You think a cowboy just drank from any creek he found? He didn't dare, not if he'd been on the trail long enough to bury a friend who did. Dysentery and what they called camp fever emptied out cow outfits faster than any stampede. So they carried the third forgotten tool, and it was hiding in plain sight in every chuck wagon: charcoal. A cowboy would take charred wood from the morning fire, crush it, and drop it into a cloth to strain his water through. Charcoal grabs onto foul-tasting compounds and many impurities as the water passes through it. It's the exact same principle sitting inside the expensive water filter you paid good money for right now. They figured it out with a burnt stick and a bandana. But there's a smarter version they used, and this is the one I want you to remember. They'd fill a tin cup with water, drop in glowing charcoal from the fire, and let it sit. Then they'd pour the clear water off the top. Between the charcoal and the boiling, they cut their sickness way down. On the Goodnight Loving Trail, which Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving opened in 1866, keeping the outfit healthy across the dry stretch of the Pecos meant the difference between delivering a herd and losing everything. Charcoal cleans your water, but it does a whole lot more than that, and the second use is the one that saved a man's life when the doctor was 200 miles away. That same charcoal taken by mouth was the frontier answer to a bad belly and to certain poisons. It binds to toxins in the gut so the body carries them out instead of soaking them in. Walk into any emergency room today with the wrong thing in your stomach and they may still give you activated charcoal. It's on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines right now. The Cowboys were a century and a half ahead, using a lump of char from last night's fire. Now I have to stop and say something plain, because this is the part that started to make me angry the more I dug into it. We didn't forget these things by accident. Somewhere along the line it stopped being profitable for us to know them. You can't sell a man a monthly filter subscription if he knows a burnt stick does the job. Hold that thought, because it only gets worse from here. The next tool I underestimated my whole life is one you probably have in a drawer right now and think is decoration: the bandana. I thought it was a fashion thing, a cowboy movie prop. It was one of the most versatile survival tools a man on the frontier owned, and he'd have laughed at anyone who called it decoration. Pulled up over the nose, it filtered the choking dust behind 3,000 head of cattle so a drover didn't ruin his lungs. Soaked in water and tied around the neck, it cooled the blood in the big vessels there and kept him from going down with heat stroke in the Texas sun. But it went further. A bandana was a bandage, a sling, a tourniquet, a strainer for water, a pot holder off a hot iron, a hobble for a horse, and a bag for carrying. One square of cotton did the work of a dozen modern single-use products. The old hands had a saying that a man might forget his hat but never his neckerchief, and now I understand why. Here's how you use it today, and this is for every one of you watching from a city, because I know some of you are thinking this is all ranch talk. It isn't. Keep a plain cotton bandana in your car and in your coat pocket. In a smoky building, it filters air well enough to buy you breathing time. In summer heat, wet it and wrap your neck and you'll feel the difference in 2 minutes. Cut yourself, and it's a clean pressure bandage. That's a survival kit that fits in your back pocket and costs about $2. A bandana handles heat. Therefore, let's talk about the opposite. Because the cold country hid a tool so simple that when I learned it, I actually said it out loud to an empty room. Cowboys working the northern ranges in Montana and Wyoming faced winters that killed cattle by the thousands. The great die-up of the winter of 1886 and 1887 wiped out whole herds and broke big outfits for good. The men who lived through it did something with their feet that I'd never heard in my life. They stuffed their boots with dry grass and paper. Dry grass traps air, and trapped air is what insulation actually is. A layer of dry grass or hay packed loose around the foot inside a boot created a pocket of still, warm air that kept toes from freezing when the temperature dropped far below zero. Newspaper under the shirt and around the middle did the same for the body, and hobos and soldiers used that same trick for generations after. Still air is the warmest thing there is, and it's free. You can do this tonight if your heat ever fails. Crumple newspaper loosely, not tight, and layer it under your clothes and inside your shoes. It sounds foolish until the power's out in an ice storm and you can't feel your feet. Then it sounds like genius, and it always was. Now staying warm is one thing, finding your way home in the dark is another, and this next one is where I stopped thinking of these old boys as simple. Nobody handed a cowboy a map with roads on it. Most of the country he crossed had never been surveyed, so he read the sky, and the tool he used was already on his wrist, so to speak, his own hands. Hold your hand at arm's length against the horizon, and each finger width is about 2 degrees of the sky. 4 fingers is roughly the sun dropping for 1 hour. That's how a man knew how much daylight he had left to make camp before dark caught him in bad country. At night he found the North Star off the Big Dipper, the same as sailors did, and he never lost his direction. But the piece almost nobody teaches is how he told time without a watch at night. He watched the Big Dipper swing around the North Star like the hand of a great clock, and after enough nights he could name the hour within a half hour just by where it sat. A watch could break or wind down, the sky never did. You can practice this from a city balcony tonight if the sky's clear. Find the North Star once and you'll never be truly lost outdoors again. That's a piece of freedom no phone battery can take away from you. But knowing where you are doesn't feed you, and food on the trail is where the real forgotten genius lives. So let me hand you the tools that kept a man from starving. The first one you've heard the name of and never understood. Pemmican. People think it's just dried meat. It isn't, and the difference is everything. Pemmican is lean meat dried hard, pounded to a powder, and mixed with an equal weight of rendered fat, sometimes with dried berries worked in. Sealed from air, it lasts for years without refrigeration. Years. The fat and the dryness together starve the spoilage. The plains tribes perfected it over centuries, and the fur traders and cowboys adopted it because it was the most concentrated food they had. A single pound of pemmican carries roughly the nourishment of several pounds of fresh meat, all the energy a working man needed, packed small and light. Arctic explorers took it to the poles for the same reason. It was the original survival ration, and no factory was involved. Here's the everyday version for you. You don't need a fire pit or a hunted animal. Buy lean beef. Dry it in your own kitchen oven on the lowest setting until it snaps. Grind it and mix it with an equal amount of melted beef tallow or even good rendered fat. Press it into cakes. Store it cool. You've just made a food that outlasts anything on the store shelf with 3 ingredients and no chemicals you can't pronounce. That's the meal they don't want in your pantry because you can't be sold a subscription to it. Pemmican fed the body, but there was a second trail food that did something pemmican couldn't, and it's the reason cowboys didn't lose their teeth and get sick on months of meat. If this kind of rediscovered knowledge is hitting home for you, I put together a whole lot more of it in my book Frontier Habits, where I go deeper into the daily systems these men built around tools most people have completely forgotten. It covers the full reasoning behind why these methods worked, not just the what but the why, laid out the same way I'd explain it sitting across a fire from you. You can find the link to it in the description below. Now, what I'm about to share next is the part that genuinely made me angry the more I dug into it, because we didn't lose this knowledge by accident. Sourdough. Every chuck wagon carried a crock of sourdough starter, and the cook guarded that starter like it was gold, because it was. It was a living culture of wild yeast and bacteria, and the cook would sleep with it on cold nights to keep it from dying. From that one crock came bread, biscuits, and flapjacks day after day with no store yeast, because there was no store. Some starters on working ranches have been kept alive and fed for well over 100 years, passed down like an heirloom. Now here's what the old-timers didn't know in scientific words but knew in their guts. That fermentation made the bread easier to digest and unlocked nutrients the body couldn't otherwise reach, which helped keep a meat-heavy trail crew from falling apart. Modern nutrition research backs every bit of that today, and you can start your own this week in a jar on your counter. Flour and water, a spoonful of each fed daily, and in about a week wild yeast from the very air in your kitchen moves in, and you have living bread starter that never needs buying again. I keep one going now. My grandmother had one. I threw hers out when she passed because I thought it was spoiled trash. That's a regret I'll carry, and it's exactly why I'm handing you this instead of letting it die out. Bread and meat keep you going. Therefore, the next question is the one that separated the men who came home from the ones who didn't. What did they do when the body broke down and there was no doctor? This is where I want everyone listening to lean in, because whether you live on 10,000 acres or in a third-floor apartment, your body is the same body, and doctors are not always coming fast. The frontier medicine chest was mostly plants and simple scents, and a lot of it flat out works. Start with the one growing in the crack of your city sidewalk right now. Plantain, not the banana. The common weed with the broad-ribbed leaf that pushes up through every lawn and parking lot in America. Cowboys and pioneers chewed the leaf and pressed it onto stings, bites, cuts, and blisters, and it draws out inflammation and helps stop bleeding and itching. It's one of the most useful first aid plants on the continent, and most people spray it as a weed without ever knowing what they're killing. Next to it, yarrow. The old name for it was soldier's woundwort, because soldiers packed wounds with it clear back to ancient times to slow bleeding. Cowboys used it the same way for a bad cut miles from help. It helps blood clot and it fights infection. It grows wild across most of the country and in plenty of city parks. And the one that stopped me cold when I read the history, willow bark. Chewing the inner bark of a willow eased pain and brought down fever, and it works because it contains salicin, the natural parent of the aspirin in your medicine cabinet. Every time you take an aspirin, you are taking the refined, patented, paid-for version of something a cowboy stripped off a creekside willow for free. Let that sit with you a second. They took the free thing, changed it just enough to own it, and sold it back to us. That pattern is the whole story of what happened to this knowledge. That's the anger I promised you'd feel, and now you know it's earned. But before I give you the last and best secret, there are a few more tools I can't let you leave without, because each one replaces something you're overpaying for right now. Tallow. Rendered beef fat, and the cowboy used it for everything. Rubbed into boots and saddles, it waterproofed the leather and kept it from cracking in the sun. Smeared on the skin, it protected against wind and chapping in brutal weather. It was the base of the salves they made for cracked hands and sore feet. Today you buy separate products for every one of those, each in its own plastic bottle. One block of tallow does all of it and never spoils if you keep it right. Then the possibles bag. That was the cowboy's small leather pouch of odds and ends, named because it held anything that might possibly be needed. Flint, a bit of steel, a needle, wax thread, a fish hook, a twist of tobacco, char cloth for catching a spark. It was the original everyday carry, thought out with real care, every item earning its place because weight mattered on horseback. Look at what people pay for fancy tactical kits now. It's the possibles bag with a markup, and inside it char cloth, which I have to explain because it's nearly magic and completely forgotten. Char cloth is a scrap of cotton cooked in a closed tin with no air until it turns black. That blackened cloth catches the smallest spark from flint and steel and holds a glowing ember you can blow into flame. Without it, striking a fire with flint and steel is maddening. With it, you have fire in seconds. You can make char cloth in a mint tin over your kitchen stove tonight, and once you have it, you never truly depend on a lighter or matches again. Here's another they carried that I never once thought about. Horsehair. Braided horsehair made ropes, hat bands, and cinches, but the clever use was as a fishing line and snare. Twisted horsehair is strong, nearly invisible in water, and a man could set a snare or a fishing line with what he combed out of his own horse's tail. No store and no cost. When your gear runs out, the country and the animals with you provide, if you know how to look. And the tin cup? I laughed at how simple this is, but the humble tin cup on a cowboy's saddle was cooking pot, coffee boiler, measuring cup, water dipper, and eating bowl all in one piece of metal that couldn't shatter and weighed nothing. He could set it right in the coals. Modern camping gear splits all those jobs into 10 items you carry separately. One cup did it all, and it lasted a lifetime, and then his son's lifetime after that. Now let me pull the city folks all the way back in, because I promise this wasn't only for ranch hands, and I mean it. Everything I'm about to say you can do in a small apartment with no yard and no special gear. You can keep a sourdough starter in a jar on a windowsill. You can dry meat in an oven and press pemmican on a kitchen counter. You can make char cloth in a tin on an electric stove. You can keep a bandana, a tin cup, and a block of tallow in a drawer and be more prepared than most people with a garage full of gadgets. This knowledge was never about land. It was about not needing to be rescued, and that fits in any home in America. That brings me to a few of the sharpest ones, the tools that show just how much thinking went into a life we now call simple. Cowboys read the weather off the animals and the sky better than a forecast. Cattle grazing hard and low with their tails to a rising wind told a man a storm was coming, so he'd move them to shelter before it hit. A ring around the moon meant rain or snow within a day, and it does because that ring is ice crystals in high cloud riding ahead of a storm front. They planned a whole day's ride and the safety of hundreds of animals off signs that cost nothing to read. You can read that moon ring tonight from any parking lot. They kept meat without a refrigerator, using salt and smoke and a cool cellar, and that alone made a family free of the store for a whole winter. They made soap from tallow and wood ash lye, so they never bought a bar in their lives. They fixed a broken tooth's pain with oil of clove and treated a rope burn with honey, which we now know kills bacteria and heals wounds so well that hospitals use medical honey on stubborn wounds today. Every single one of these was later proven right by a laboratory, decades or a century after some cowboy staked his life on it and won. I could give you 50 more. But I promised you one secret at the start, the best of the lot, pulled from a real source, and it's time I made good on that. So here it is, the thing that changed how I see all of this. I found it chasing down accounts of trail cooks, the men who ran the chuck wagon, because the cook was the second most important man in the outfit after the trail boss. Digging through descriptions of chuck wagon practice from the Chisholm Trail era around 1868, I kept finding a reference to how the cook kept the whole crew from getting sick, and it wasn't the charcoal and it wasn't the sourdough. It was something he did with a sack hung under the wagon and a simple bit of understanding about the desert air. The cook hung a bag made of loosely woven canvas or burlap, filled with drinking water, right out in the open air under the wagon or off the side where the wind hit it, in the full heat of the day. It sounds insane. You'd think the sun would cook that water hot as blood. It did the opposite. A little water is meant to seep slowly through the weave and wet the outside of the bag, and as the dry wind blows across it, that moisture evaporates. Evaporation pulls heat out of what's left inside, and the water in that bag comes out noticeably cooler than the air around it, even under a blazing sun. They had cold drinking water in the middle of a Texas summer with no ice, no cellar, and no machine. Just cloth, water, and wind. They called it a desert water bag, and canvas versions were still sold and hung off car bumpers and truck grills across the Southwest into the 1950s and 60s. And then air conditioning came and we forgot it completely. The physics is airtight. It's the exact same evaporative cooling that makes you shiver stepping out of a pool on a breezy day. The cook used it to keep the crew's water cool enough that men would actually drink enough to stay alive in the heat, and cool water carries less risk than warm water sitting stagnant in a barrel growing sick. Here is why this is the one I saved for last. You can do it this weekend with nothing. Take a clean cotton or canvas bag, or even a thick cotton sock over a bottle, get the outside wet, hang it in a shady spot where a breeze moves, or in front of a fan. Come back in an hour and the water inside will be cooler than the room. No electricity, no refrigerator, no cost. In a summer power outage, that trick keeps drinking water cool and keeps a family going, and almost nobody under the age of 70 knows it anymore. That's the whole story of this video in one canvas bag. The knowledge existed. It worked so well that ordinary people carried it for 100 years. Then someone sold us a machine that did the same job for a monthly bill, and the free version quietly disappeared from memory. But it never stopped working. It was just waiting in old trail records for somebody to go looking, and now it's yours. That's what I want you to walk away feeling tonight. Not that the old days were quaint, but that something was taken from you, quietly, a piece at a time, and you just took a good bit of it back. Every tool I gave you tonight does a job you're currently renting from somebody else, and every one of them lasts longer, costs less, and answers to nobody but you. You're not the kind of man who wants to be dependent. If you were, you wouldn't have watched this far. You'd rather know how a thing works and do it yourself than pay forever for the convenient version that leaves you helpless the day it fails. That's not old-fashioned. Out here we call that being free. So tell me one thing down in the comments. Of everything tonight, which one are you actually going to try first? The desert water bag, the sourdough starter, or the char cloth in a tin? Pick one and type it out, and tell me what town or what state you're watching from, because I genuinely like knowing how far this reaches. Don't just think it, write it down where I can see it. And if you want to keep pulling this lost frontier know-how back out of the dark with the rest of us who refuse to forget it, come along and stay. The next one I'm putting together is about a single plant the cattle drives depended on to keep the herd calm and the men fed, and what it did to a horse's stamina when they ran low on feed will make you question everything you were told about how those drives crossed 1,000 miles. That's coming soon. Don't miss it. Before you go, let me tell you where this really opens up. Inside the frontier circle, I continue this video with the part we couldn't fit here. You can ask me your own question and I answer you myself, not some machine. And you won't be alone, folks like you are already in there with us. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen, and you can cancel any time. If you enjoyed learning about these old ways, there's plenty more waiting for you right here. Take a moment to subscribe and stay a while. I'll keep sharing these forgotten skills with you.